Alright guys, so what we're going to be looking at here is basically how to use your calculator. Some of you may already know how to do some of these things, but we need to make sure we're all kind of on the same page before we jump in and start using our calculator to do certain things in this class. You'll notice as we go through the class that a lot of times we do things without a calculator. In fact, I would say for the large portion, especially the first half of this class, we will not use our calculator for much. But you do need to know how to use this. That's why we're going to go over certain things right now. This is more basic functions of your calculator, things that you should know coming into the class, okay? Something that you should know, first of all, is on the calculus test, you will have a calculator for 1/3 of the exam. I realize that's not like half or anything like that, but for 1/3 of the exam, you will get to use a calculator. And so you need to know how to do certain things. And there's calculus things that we'll learn later in this class, but for right now, we need to talk about how to use our calculator and what I expect you to know how to do, okay? A couple of things that you do need to know. Calculators that do work on the AP exam that you can use. So number one thing is a TI-84 Plus. That's the one that we'll be using in class. That's the one that I'm the most familiar with. They're up in the corner of the room. Many of you have one already. There are other calculators that graph that work just fine, like the Casio works, or if you have the TI Inspire, that calculator also works. The difference is I don't have enough knowledge on how to do everything with those calculators. So if you're using those, you'll have to figure out how they work on your own versus knowing what to do based on what we're going to talk about right here. So I suggest that you get used to the TI-84, but whatever calculator you want to use, if it's a graphing calculator, it does need to be able to graph, but as long as you have a graphing calculator, you should be good, okay? A couple of things that you do need to know what your calculator should do. You'll notice that there's 5 things over here that your calculator should do. Add, subtract, multiply, divide. You should be able to graph something on your calculator. You should be able to change the window that you're looking at once you graph something. You should be able to find out where a function crosses the x-axis. So you look at a graph, and if it crosses the x-axis somewhere, you need to be able to find that, not just by looking at it and guessing where it happens. And sometimes, although we won't cover it in this one, where a function has a max or a min. Things that your calculator won't do for you, so don't try to have your calculator do these things. Number one, solve an equation. That's not, there's certain ways you can manipulate your calculator to solve an equation, but that's in general not what a calculator is used for, okay? Another thing that your calculator won't do that we do talk about in this class a little bit is graph something that is not a function, something that has like y squared in it, or x's and y's mixed together. And it won't perform order of operations correctly just because you want it to. Just because you say, I typed it in right, I think I typed it in right, that doesn't mean the calculator is going to give you the correct answer. You need to know how to use your calculator, okay? So here, we're just going to go through a couple things real quick on how you do certain things. Like, here's the first thing. How do I exit a menu? Well, if I want to exit a menu, what you're going to press is you're going to press the second button, and then you're going to press the mode button, okay? That gets you out of any menu. Now, I've seen a lot of people try a lot of different things. Like, I see this a lot when I'm looking at my calculator. I see people doing this all the time. Like, they'll be in a menu of some sort, and they're like, I have no idea what to do, so I'm going to press y equals, or I'm going to press, a lot of people press graph, actually. Press graph, and then they press, like, enter. Or they just turn their calculator off. The easiest way to get out of anything is just the second button, and then the mode button, and that will quit you back to the main screen that you're used to seeing, okay? So that is how you exit a menu. The next thing that we want to talk about is how to insert something into something I've already typed. Let's say you forgot to make something be x squared, okay? What we do is we press the second button and then the delete button, okay? That is how you insert something. So say I had over here and I had like 2x plus 3, and then I just had x minus 1. Oops, I forgot to put an x right there, sorry. Put an x right there. And let's say I wanted to put a plus 2 right there, but I don't want to have to retype the minus 1. If I press the second button and then the delete button, I can put plus 2x or something like that, and it'll insert that in there without deleting or typing over. The default is that it types over, but that's not what you have to do. Okay, so second and then delete. We'll type over something that you've already typed in. The next thing, and you don't have to do it this way, but if you want to put a fraction anywhere on your calculator, because a lot of times you have big long fractions with stuff on the top and the bottom. Rather than using parentheses, because that's what some people use, I found the easiest way to put a fraction is press alpha, then y equals, then press enter. That is not the only way to do it, but I found that that is the easiest way to put a fraction into a calculator. And then you'll notice you've got a top and a bottom of a fraction, so you don't have to worry about putting parentheses. Okay, so again, alpha, y equals, enter will put a fraction on your calculator. The next one, how do I pull up what I previously typed? Okay, well, as long as you press the enter key, all you press is second and then enter. So if I press the second button and then the enter button, that is what I typed in previously, and it'll bring that right back up so I don't have to type the entire thing in again. That will help you more as we get further into the class. Okay. How do I find the root power of something? Well, to find the root power, you press the math button, then you press 4, and then you press enter. Okay. Do not do this. Let's say I wanted to take the third root of something. Don't press 3 and then type in the square root. I know that's how some calculators work. That is not how this calculator works. Instead, you would press math and then number 4 for the cube root or number 5 for any other root, and then you could just say I want to take the fourth root right there. They mean something different, so don't type them in. Don't put a number and then just type that square root right there. Okay? The next one that you'll need to know is how to find the absolute value of something. To find absolute value, we press the math button, and then we press the right over arrow, and then we press enter. When we do that, so I press the math button, over, enter. That again, oops, I put it inside that square root, math, over, enter. That brings up absolute value. There are other ways to do it, but I found that that is the easiest way to bring up an absolute value sign when you need it. Okay, there are other ways, but we're not going to talk about those. Now, if I want to graph something, what we do is we press the y equals button right there. Now, when we want to type in something like x to the third minus 2x plus 1, so I press y equals, and let's say I want to type in x to the third, so I go x to the third minus 2x plus 1. You'll notice that I keep clicking on this x comma t comma weird circle comma n button for my variable. That's because that is the variable button. So I type it in and I press graph. Oops, hold on, let me do something real quick. So I press graph and I get a graph that looks like that. Okay? Now if you didn't get that, that means your viewing window isn't set to the default, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So if you need to reset your viewing window, what you press is the zoom button, then number 6, then you press enter, and that will bring you back to this screen that you're used to seeing, this one right here, that's like from negative 12 to 12, or negative 10 to 10, and then negative 12 to 12, I believe, on the Y's. They're not exactly like that. This says it's negative 10 to 10. Maybe that's right. Anyway, this is the viewing window that you're used to seeing, so that's the one that we're going to look at, okay? There are other zoom features on your calculator. You can choose any of these other ones. I don't recommend using any of the other ones other than Zoom 6 just because they help a little bit, but there's other ways to type stuff into your calculator and graph things. Okay? Now, if you want to change your viewing window to anything else, you just use the X, you press the window button, and then you just change your X min and X max, your Y min and your Y max to whatever you want them to be. Okay, you don't need to change anything other than those and that. So let's say I wanted to graph this function. So I've got y equals sine of 1 over x. So I go sine of 1 over x, oops, divided by x, to the 1/2 x power, so I'm just going to put 0.5 x squared power, minus 0.45. Okay, now when I go to graph that initially, I don't get much of anything. Like you see this graph, you're like, okay. Let's say I wanted to only graph it on the interval from 1 to 4 and make it so I can see it a little bit better. So I would press the window button, and my x min would be the x value I want to start at, and the x max would be the x value I want to end at. Then on my y min and my y max in this graph, I could see it didn't go very far up or down, so maybe I just want to change that to be like negative 3 to 3 or something like that. Once I do that, I just press graph, and you'll notice the shape of the graph has changed. So now I can see it a little bit better. There are a decent amount of problems when you're using your calculator where you will have to manipulate your screen to make it show up. Okay? So we have what it looked like before, and on this example, I use negative 2 to 2 to see what it would look like after. Another thing that you'll have to do fairly often is find out where your graph crosses the x-axis. To do that, you'll press the second button, then the trace button, then the to button, then the enter button. So second, trace, Number 2, enter. Now you'll notice that it says, I want to know, and let me do that second trace, number 2. Okay, oh, I actually don't have to press enter. I screwed up on that. Now, once I get here, my calculator says left bound. It wants to know where I think it crosses the x-axis, but it needs to know where I'm thinking. So you can either type in a number or you can press enter, and then it says right bound, and you press enter, and then you make a guess, and it shows you in this case that that graph crosses at 1.6694, blah, 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 blah. Okay? This is how we find a 0 or a root on our calculator. Now let's say I had these two graphs and I wanted to graph them. I'm actually not going to do this one just in the interest of time. Let's say I had these two graphs and I wanted to find out where they cross each other. In order to do that, we would graph both of them first, then we would press the second button, then the trace button, then number 5. Once we do that, it would take us to our screen and it's going to say first curve, you press enter there. Second curve, you press enter there. Then you move the cursor to roughly where you think those two graphs cross and you press enter again. If you ever want to change which graph it is you're looking at, because sometimes you have more than one graph on the screen, you just press the up arrow or the down arrow and you'll see that it changes from what the cursor is from one graph to another. Okay? So those are the basic things that I want you to be able to do. Now, there are some things that we do need to talk about that people get frustrated with their calculator sometimes. So let's talk about each of those. The first one is, what does this error mean when I get this error on my calculator? Invalid dimension. Basically what that means is you accidentally activated a stats feature, but you didn't input the stuff correctly. That's the long way to do it. Really what you need to understand is you made it so a plot is highlighted. You'll notice if I typed in that graph that we were looking at earlier, but the plot right there is highlighted, that means that you've accidentally activated the stat feature. So you scroll up to it and press enter on it, and it will turn that off, and your thing will graph just fine. Okay? This next one, no sign change, what that means is you didn't identify the correct x interval where you think the graph crossed the x-axis. In other words, you just have to redo the problem. So here are two different examples. The first one, you can see here, I've got my left bound and my right bound, but I did not choose where, on that interval, there's no place where that graph crosses the x-axis. On the second one, you can see that I did indeed indicate where it crosses the x-axis. So the first one, no. The second one, yes. That's what you're supposed to do if you get no sign change. Another one, window range. This one's pretty easy to understand. You probably just went in when you did your window range and mixed up your x min and your x max, like I did here, for example, where I've got my x min is 4, my x max is 1. If the min is bigger than the max, then your calculator cannot graph what it needs to. Okay, so just understand that. Lastly, and there are more errors than this that we'll talk about as we get more into the calculus stuff, but the last one, and this one will probably happen the most often out of all of them, is your syntax error. What that means is you've typed something into the calculator that the calculator doesn't understand. I would guess that probably 90% of the time, that means that what you did is you typed in something and you got a negative, you used the negative sign or the minus sign instead of the negative sign. Let me show you just real quick what I'm talking about on the calculator here. So I can quit out of that. Let's say I wanted to type in -4 plus 2. Oops. So let's say I just had that. Your calculator really won't let you do this a lot of the time. So let me see if I can. So I go -4 plus 2. Now, it looks like I typed it incorrectly, but you see syntax. Now, the nice thing about syntax is there's options. If you click option number 2, it'll take you directly to what it doesn't understand. It is saying this is a subtract sign, and I need that to be a negative sign instead. That is by far the biggest error that I see most people make. There are other ones too, but that is by far the biggest mistake that I see people make in this class. So hopefully that helps you guys a little bit on using your calculator and understanding some of the basics. There are many other errors that you can get, but we're not going to talk about those right now. So if you have any questions about this or anything else, please let me know.